Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the annual event for the Nathaniel Wharton Fund. We've been having these events for 25 years, but this year, the webinar is our unprecedented format for these unprecedented times. We hope you enjoy our speaker today to talk about aging. Like St. Augustine on chastity, aging is something we'd like to do, but not quite yet. So we hope that our speaker will have some suggestions on how to extend our age and add some stoppage time to our biological clocks. Before that, I'd like to turn the controls over to Catherine LaValle, who will explain to you how the seminar works and the webinar controls and features. Catherine.
Thank you, Philip. I would now like to direct the attendees' attention to the chat feature on your Zoom screen. We will be primarily using this to facilitate the Q&A portions of the evening. Dr. Epel will also be using the poll feature of Zoom in order to give you a chance to interact with her during her presentations. Just choose your answer and hit submit, and you'll get to see how your other attendees are voting. I'll now turn it over to Columbia University Medical Center faculty, Dr. Ralph Wharton.
Thank you all for attending this webinar this evening without dinner, but certainly with some intellectual nourishment. As Charles Dickens would write in The Tale of Two Cities, it is the best of times, it is the worst of times, a time of hope and a time of despair. The hope and the best of times is in the dazzling science we shall all depend on to survive the next year. Our fund is named after my father, who was a patent attorney in Boston. He joined a distinguished firm that attracted many inventors, some of whom plagued our home as well as his office. Some were funny, like a hot dog machine, which combined the hot dog, bun, and mustard all together. He was supportive of many inventors. Most were serious and very important, like wet strength paper, which was used in the invasion of Italy for supplies during World War II. And supplies were thrown overboard to troops who were in places where there were no ports for supply ships. So the wet strength paper permitted supplies to float in. Another was for cigarette filters to save cases of lung cancer. Another was for cellophane. Our idea was at the Wharton Fund to create a climate for innovative clinical research with creative students, fellows, and attendings here at Columbia Medical Center. We were fortunate to have the leadership of my brother Leonard Wharton, a distinguished professor of physical chemistry at the University of Chicago, as chairman of our board here for over 25 years. With his help, we launched this enterprise under his leadership, and under his leadership, we thrived and prospered. I wanted to take this opportunity tonight to applaud his superb guidance and help in establishing professorship here, graduate student sponsorships, and other projects. Thank you, Len. We all salute you. I also wanted to thank the help of our dedicated and devoted board members. Also, we've had many students from the Columbia Medical School and around the world have been on our team. Our participants have been diverse and range from Sweden, Russia, Sri Lanka, Italy, and all over the United States. It's now my pleasure to introduce my co-collaborator at the Reiner Center here, Professor Richard Sloan. Richard Sloan and I have been jointly leading this enterprise for about 30 years. Despite some stresses, hospital concerns, and life stresses, we have survived and succeeded together. He is the Nathaniel Wharton Professor of Behavioral Medicine at the Columbia Medical Center. Thank you, Richard, for all your help as well.
Thanks very much, Ralph. And thank you all for attending this webinar. It's unfortunate that we're unable to do this in person as we usually do, but this is a fine alternative. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Elissa Epel, who is a best-selling author and a professor at the University of California at San Francisco in the Department of Psychiatry. Her primary work is on how chronic stress influences biological aging and how mindfulness interventions can buffer the effects of stress and promote psychological and physiological thriving. She also studies food addiction and obesity. She's a member of the National Academy of Medicine. She is the president of the Academy of Behavioral Medicine Research, along with her colleague and Nobel laureate Elizabeth Blackburn. Elissa wrote The Telomere Effect, The New Science of Living Younger Longer. It was a New York Times bestseller, and it integrates the science of cell aging with practical daily tips. She's won far too many awards for her research to list here. She's been featured on multiple venues, including TED-Med, The Today Show, CBS's Morning Show, 60 Minutes, National Public Radio, and many others. And in addition to doing research, she enjoys leading meditation retreats with her colleagues. She's a terrific scientist, a wonderful friend, and a great colleague, and it's my pleasure to introduce her to you.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was so lovely. I'm just so delighted to be here and be your speaker this year. I am both friends, colleagues, and admirers of the Wharton Fund faculty. So it's just, I wish we were in person, but here we go. And so to make this interactive, I want to hear your questions on the chat line. I have a few questions for you, and we will connect in the best ways possible, given our limitations of being in virtual space together. So I'm going to show you some slides to really take a high level but a personal level analysis of your age, of aging, our aging bodies, and how we can live our best life. Okay, so my first question is, do you see what I see? I can't see anyone. Unless I get a chat that tells me I'm off in space, I'm starting. So thank you, Seth. So we're going to talk about aging and really about what aspects of aging can we control. It's just such a delight to present in memory of Nathaniel Wharton and the center, because part of the mission of the center is to find practical ways to incorporate mind-body issues in the study and practices of medicine. And what could be more important right now? We are in the midst of a pandemic, and the only thing we can do to protect our health is behavioral, how to understand how to motivate people to be safe, and also protecting our own immune system. So, and that means managing our daily behaviors, our lifestyle, our stress. So it's all about mind-body issues right now until we have a vaccine to help us. And when we do have a vaccine, that's not going to take care of everything. We're still going to be needing to practice the wisdom of the body. So I will tell you a little bit about the faculty at the center at the very end, and we'll get to have a panel together. But for now, we're going to focus on this question about age. We know that the biggest predictor of any disease or dying is age, or any chronic disease. It's age, and age is immutable, right? Chronological age. So here you see the doctor saying, you're 57 years old. I'd like to get that down a bit. Can you get your age down? So of course, this is why we're a society obsessed with age and looking younger. And we're going to focus on actually the plasticity of age, because whereas chronological age is fixed and immutable, biological age is not. And we have much more control over it than we think. So let me first ask you, I'm going to ask Catherine or Leah to put on the poll for me. I can't see my poll button here, but I have a poll for you. So I'm going to ask you the first question in the poll. And the question is, how long do you want to live? Have you thought about this? Do you have a number? I've given you 4 options. Okay, so we're sharing the results, and there's no wrong answers. 100 is often a goal for people. But when you really think about it and you get older and you see what it looks and feels like to have an older body, the answer changes. And it's this most common answer by far, which is, I want to live as long as I'm well. And so, as Philip said when we started, everyone wants to live long, but no one wants to be old. So what does that mean? What does that look like? What does it look like to live long? So I'm introducing to you the term health span. Health span is not longevity, but it's living long well. And so that's why we called our telomere book, How to Live Longer Better. So in good health. And so disease span might mean you live for 20 years with disease and managing that. And that's, of course, a challenging life. And health span might mean you die at the same age, but you're only sick at the very end of life. So that's what we want to work toward. Now, this is an opportunity for you to just take a little bit of a kind of a midlife or maybe late life assessment of some questions that we don't often ask of ourselves. So a question is, why? What do you live for? What do you look forward to in your future? How do you want to spend your time for the rest of your life? What matters to you? And who do you want to spend your time with? Because it turns out this is what matters in life. It matters that that we have purpose, that we wake up and feel that there's something to look forward to feel that there is some meaning or purpose in our day, even if it's very small. Small things are meaningful. So waking up and even thinking, what today can I do that might make someone smile or mean something to someone else? And then relationships turn out to be very important. No one on their tombstone or no one at their deathbed regrets not working more at the office for longer hours, but rather they care about love and their relationships. So here you can see a kind of simple bar graph of what I was saying about health span. So Jane and Mary both died at 80, but Jane lived for 20 of those years in the disease span, managing the chronic disease, feeling pain, feeling suffering, whereas Mary had compressed morbidity and only got sick toward the end of her life. And of course, I wish that for all of us. How do we move the levers of aging to slow it down biologically? I'm showing you one slide that blows me away. This is the work of Becca Levy and other colleagues who look at beliefs about aging. What we believe about being old shapes how soon we die and what we die of. So when you think about aging, I'd like you to close your eyes and think about a picture of what you typically think of for a very elderly person. What is their life like? What is their social life like? Okay, so here's what we know. When we have very negative stereotypes about aging, that people are lonely and greedy and they get dementia and they get cranky and all of these negative stereotypes, that actually shapes our behavior, makes us more likely to become that. When we have positive stereotypes or role models of what healthy aging looks like, we are more likely to manifest that. So having negative aging stereotypes, having all of these adjectives about the kind of bad changes that come with aging is predictive of memory and hearing loss, dementia, slower healing from surgeries like hip surgery, and earlier mortality. So it's very powerful what you believe about your own aging. So I'd like you to close your eyes again, and I would like you to imagine a very positive role model of age. Maybe someone you know, it may be just an ideal vision. And visualize that person and those qualities that you admire, that you aspire to. And that's what I want you to think of. Okay, I love this. Sophie said, I imagine Ralph Wharton. Same. Okay, this is beautiful, Ralph. So this is exactly what I mean. You see people who are thriving and engaged in life and loving and giving, and that is what you can manifest. And so it turns out that I won't go into, we don't know the biology of stereotypes, but I will just say it's probably influencing everything, our biology, our behavior. Okay, so that's point number one. So as an overview of all the factors that shape our rate of aging, I've given you the bad list and the good list. So what accelerates our aging? These negative views, poor daily habits, the American junk food diet, not getting enough sleep, being sedentary, loneliness, being isolated, not feeling purpose, not engaging in purpose, and then toxic stress. And we're going to go in detail about stress. And then on the optimal aging side, what slows down our aging? Positive views of aging, daily habits that are small nudges. They're small changes in our day. We might walk more, we might sleep more, we might have more social connections, but this adds up to healthy aging. It's these small daily habits that we have. Love and connection. So good relationships is an important predictor of health span. And then stress resilience. And boy, that's a buzzword these days, right? We all need more stress resilience. So I will go into this idea that stress is tied up with our aging and talk a little bit more about what I mean by stress resilience. And I don't mean relax, although it's very important to relax. I mean embracing stress. Boy, do we have stress in our world, and living well with it and riding those waves. So toxic stress is this kind of chronic ongoing stress that wears us out. Biologically, it speeds up aging, and I'll give you some examples. Whereas hormetic stress is this acute stress that we can recover from, that we can approach in a positive, with a positive mindset. So my research has really been on stress and aging and really trying to understand this relationship. Stress is intricately tied up in aging, but it can slow it down or it can speed it up. And that is partly up to us. So what regulates the speed of aging? There's the chronological immutable clock. We can just ignore that, right? Because it's the biological aging that is elastic, that can go fast or slow. Now, what do I mean by biological aging? Different researchers have their favorite measures. I have been very, let's just say, passionate about looking inside the cell way before someone gets sick, even when they're born, looking inside the cell and looking at mechanisms of aging, looking at the functions in the cell that actually predict how long that cell is going to live well. So aging biology, more than age, is what we control and what is going to drive early disease. So here are three major pathways inside the cell that we can measure. Now, who has telomeres? Does anyone here have telomeres? I can't see your faces, but it was a trick question. We all have these telomeres inside every cell in our body. So our chromosomes, the DNA that determines every protein that our body makes, it's the map for who we become biologically. So these chromosomes are protected at the ends by telomeres, these caps that are made of base pairs, but they're not genes. And they're actually protecting the genes. They're also birds and a canary, so they're very sensitive to the stress inside the cell and inside the body. And when they experience a lot of stressful chemicals, oxidative stress, inflammation, they respond, they shorten, or they scream out and they send signals and say, shut down, this this is going bad. The cell might turn cancerous. My genes might get damaged. So the game is over. So that cell dies, or it becomes senescent. And a senescent cell is something we want to avoid, because a senescent cell means it doesn't die, it sticks around, but it starts cranking out inflammation, and it can't defend itself in the way that normal cells do. So if it's an immune cell, it's lost its ability to fight antigens, viruses, and it's just causing trouble. It's creating inflammation. So I've been studying telomeres for over 15 years, and the book that Richard mentioned is called The Telomere Effect, and really I wanted to call it Renew, because telomere science is about how our cells renew, because when we can actually lengthen our telomeres. This is a reversible system. This is part of aging that we can control. And so we now know, a decade later, we know how to protect our telomeres. So when they get too short, the cell dies or becomes inflammatory, but we can help them get stable or longer. And so that the cell can go on and keep dividing and renewing. So tissue that has cells with long telomeres turns over and replenishes. That's what we need if we want to live to 100. And yes, sing to your cells. So part of what I like to say, just to really drive the point home, is that your cells are listening to your thoughts. Your telomeres are sensitive to your mindset. So you sing to them, they're going to like that. Okay, so mitochondria. Many of you heard Martin Picard several years ago for the Wharton talk. And if you haven't, you have to hear him soon. He is the international leader in mitochondrial science, aging, and mental health and stress. So he looks a lot older than he looks a lot younger than he is. You wouldn't believe how he's mapped out this field already. But basically, the story that he has shown is that, again, our mitochondria, which are the battery in our cells and they give us energy, they are also sensitive to our social world and to stress. And he's also driven down to understand their basic mechanisms. And then the third part of cell aging is inflammation. So, and this can be measured actually just in the blood. You don't have to go inside the cell. We call it systemic inflammation. We think of this as the major pathway or highway to aging. And Peter Shapiro and Richard Sloan have done many studies trying to move the lever on the autonomic nervous system to increase our heart rate variability or vagal tone, which is one of the drivers of inflammation through exercise and other means. So all three of these pathways have been linked to stress. What kind of stress? Toxic stress, the ongoing type of stress. So I'd like to pull up our next poll and ask you to reflect on your week this week. Okay, thank you so much for sharing. Don't be shy. This is not a normal week. This is not a normal year. So those of you who wrote not at all, I bet you are not looking, you're protecting yourself from the media. Good for you. So what we see here are that we have about 35% of people who had a very or extremely stressful week. And you know what? That's pretty common for the pandemic we're in. And then the majority of people said somewhat stressed. So what does this mean? We know that feeling stressed every day for years and years becomes toxic stress. So perceived stress is normal, and we absolutely need it. We want to feel motivated and anxious when we need to do things to deal with challenges in our environment. But we just want to not be on the extremely side, on and on. So if you scored very or extremely, we want you to pay particular attention to our panel, where we're going to talk about how to promote stress resilience in all these different ways. Okay, so let's move on. There are many, many sources of stress. This is a figure I made pre-pandemic, but it all applies plus more. When we poll people every day and we say, what stressed you out today? Often it's rushing around. It's time stress, it's traffic. Maybe that's a little bit less now. It's been replaced with different things like the news every day. Climate stress. I am in San Francisco, so you can imagine I have not had a normal month. We've had extreme smoke and fires. Interpersonal stress is a very potent form of stress that gets under the skin. Conflict, depression. So there's many different sources. It's such a general word. And I'm really talking about, when I say toxic stress, situations like financial stress or severe relationship conflict that goes on and on for years. And that's what is associated with shorter telomeres, inflammation, maybe mitochondrial stress. No one has examined that except Martin. So introducing Martin Picard, he asked the question of whether the chronic stress of caregiving was associated with impaired mitochondria. He developed a way to measure mitochondrial health in a very sensitive way, looking at their enzymes, not just kind of counting how many mitochondria are in someone's blood cells, but looking at the function. And he came to me knowing that I wanted to collaborate on this. I think everyone who understands mitochondria knows that they're a critical key to aging. Turns out they're best friends with telomeres. They're right near each other in the cell, right? The telomeres are in the nucleus, and you have mitochondria surrounding them. And it turns out when the telomeres get short, they start releasing signals to the mitochondria that damage them. And when the mitochondria go bad, they start releasing reactive oxygen species, so free radicals that damage the telomeres. So they basically, if they're healthy together, or they're basically wearing each other down. So Martin looked at the mitochondria of our caregivers. We had healthy midlife caregivers. And what he found was demonstrated for the very first time that chronic life stress impairs our mitochondria. Some of these caregivers had mitochondria that were as sluggish as someone with a mitochondrial disorder. And so there you see the blue bar are parents of young children who have healthy children, and our red bar are parents of children who have autism or developmental disorder. So that's a very harsh story. This is not something you want to go tell your friends who have a child with autism. The good news is this: that difference you see, we can explain that by things we can control. We can explain that by your daily mood. So what Martin found was that if you had positive mood at night and less negative mood, so even if it's a stressful day, that was explaining the mitochondria. So it's our daily emotional response to the day that we can improve, and that we know, in a sense, our mitochondria are listening to. Martin can expand on this later. So chronic stress is an underlying factor in the rate of cellular aging. We found this in 2004 with telomeres. And of course, this was a finding that people didn't believe back then, because telomeres are this molecular measure of biological aging. And we found that just that feeling of stress, high stress over the month for these caregivers, was related to shorter telomeres. And this finding has been extended to many different types of stress now. So let's go to a more positive picture. What can we control? Turns out that all of these factors that we know are good for cardiovascular health and are good for brain aging are also good for telomere maintenance. So quality, duration of sleep, at least 7 hours a night. Quality of sleep matters too, regardless of how much you're sleeping. Meditation, we're still doing these studies. I'll say there's no definitive study, but there are many small trials that suggest that we can protect and slow the telomere erosion with regular meditation. Fruits and vegetables are such an important pathway in anti-aging. They are changing the antioxidant balance in our body. They are mopping up the free radicals. They are protecting our mitochondria. Although, Martin, we still have to show that, right, with data. But this is one factor. Richard Sloan is now really focusing on nutrition and brain health and cognition. I would say this is probably the lowest hanging fruit, not to make a pun, but lowest hanging fruit and vegetables that we can do. So I hope at your dinner or after your dinner, you're going to choose some different colors. Go look at what's in your kitchen and try to get a rainbow as close as you can to eat. And then you see that lazy cat watching TV, right? So sedentariness, shorter telomeres, fitness, longer telomeres. You may have heard Eli Putterman at the Wharton talk several years ago. Eli published a study since then showing that if you take sedentary caregivers, high stress elderly people, and you help them exercise for 6 months, their telomeres actually lengthened over that 6 months. So that's our most hopeful study yet. So I want to end with hormetic stress. So yes, chronic stress is bad. You already knew that. But did you know that when you expose your body to short-term stress, you might actually help your cells age slower? So I like to just have you think about what are the different arousal states in your day? What is, how much are you super active? You're doing aerobics type of stress? Are you feeling super aroused because of psychological stress? Are you having leisure time, sitting and relaxing? Are you having deep leisure time? Actually doing something to really unplug. So next poll, last poll, my question for you is what % of time, let's say over this last same week, have you felt truly relaxed? I mean like restorative relaxed. Okay, so this is a mix. We have quite a range here. If I was honest with myself, I'd probably be close to that kind of 5%. Although I took a long train ride, that was probably the best thing ever. I shouldn't have looked at the news on the train ride, but that was, anyway. So so we've got half our people feeling truly relaxed for about 20% of the week. Not bad. Okay, let's move on. So I can show you why I asked you, because I want you to think about what's true relaxation. And it's not what you think. So there's of course acute stress. You know what that feels like. Something happens, you have to respond. Then there's our default baseline. And we might think that we're not stressed all the time, but we probably are. So I am very interested in how we hold ourselves when nothing's happening. We shouldn't be needing to mount a stress response. How stressed are we truly? So it's something I want to argue or discuss a lot with my colleagues, Richard and Peter, to really think about how can we measure that in the body? What's the sign that the nervous system is truly relaxed? So one might be heart rate variability. Then there's leisure, like watching TV, and we might think of that as true relaxation. But I'm going to suggest that restoration, true restoration, is effortful, and it involves unplugging and doing something your body's conditioned to relax to. And of course, the best examples are mind-body activities. Mind-body health needs effortful mind-body restoration. That could be yoga, qigong, meditation. There are many different things for different people, but my point is we need to spend more time in a restorative state, especially this year. Okay, my mini lecture is over. Now we're going to hormetic acute stressors. This is where I would like to point out that we're not aware of this, but exercise is a hormetic stress. Exercise is the best example of intense acute stress that leaves us in a better state where we are, because we recover from exercise, our cells clean up junk. They clean up debris. Our vagal tone is presumably turned on even more after exercise. So it's that acute stress that is so good for our body. And so we know that for worms, if you heat them up a little bit, they become long-lived worms. And if you heat them up even more, they die. So there's a sweet spot, right, with hormetic stress. Someone asked about hot baths. Yes, so hot and cold is a very good example of hormetic stress. Yes, our body likes that. I'm doing a study on cold exposure. We're also doing a study on hypothermia, an infrared sauna for inflammation and depression. And Okay, so this is a paper that will come out, I think, next week, that I spent too long trying to write to really understand how early we like the worms. We know so much about slowing aging and kind of like lower species and mice, but what do we know about humans? And so what we do know is that there is this kind of sweet spot in the middle when we can expose ourselves to manageable stressors and recover. And that's what we think is going to lead to optimal aging. So temperature stress, someone already mentioned, breathing, intermittent hypoxia, exercise, and I'll add nutrition. And we can talk about why that's certain aspects of nutrition are hermetic stressors, either content or how we eat, like restricted feeding over a 12-hour period or longer. So one of the studies I'm doing now is testing hormetic stress, positive stress. I don't know how many of you might have heard of Wim Hof, but he is taking a method that's been used in other traditions, and he has really created a beautiful protocol for people to try hermetic stress. It involves hypoxic breathing, it involves cold or ice exposure, and he has been willing to embrace scientists studying him. And what's so fascinating is that in Wim Hof, when he was injected with endotoxin, he's this lower line here, the dark line with circles, he responded more with less inflammation to endotoxin and more of an anti-inflammatory response to IL-10. He then trained a group of people who responded with this exact same pattern. So it does look like hormetic stress may improve our immune system, and boy, do we need that. And when you think about the pandemic and what is going to help, we want to be less inflamed. We want to really take care of our immune system. Our telomeres are also probably important. No one's published this yet, but everyone's thinking the same thing, which is, whoa, like we need long telomeres so that our immune system can respond to this virus and keep replicating and not run out with ability to respond. So my last point is that one of the most exciting areas in understanding longevity is that longevity begins in the womb. I took this quote from a paper that Catherine recently published with her colleagues. Fetal programming studies have shown that the womb may be as important as the home in both mental health and physical health. And Marissa Spann, an amazing rising star in fetal health. She is imaging the brain of fetuses and showing what's influencing them. I mean, I just am completely blown away by your work, Marissa. So this is really where everything starts and the trajectories are set for life. And so we really want to think about aging in a lifespan view. There's all sorts of stress. Catherine Monk has been a pioneer for a long time showing these different types of stressors are impacting fetal health. Chemical exposures, trauma. So Catherine, I've learned so much from your work, and I really believe this is one of the most important directions in health, in understanding and promoting better public health. In the telomere world, this work on what Catherine has called intergenerational trauma, how the mother's trauma can influence the fetus. We've actually found this in the telomere world too. So this is just an example of one of the studies showing that the mom's stress during pregnancy predicts shorter telomeres in the baby on day 1 in the cord blood. Unhappy baby, no clean slate. Baby comes out and their telomeres are already shaped by the mom's experience, chemical exposures, stress, probably air pollution too. So I'm going to end with thinking about pandemic stress. Peter Shapiro has written a beautiful article, Pandemic Psychiatry. I was so thrilled to see that. I'm also in a psychiatry department, because what's happening in the world, and particularly in the US, is we have an epidemic of what looks like psychiatric disorders, but it's a normative and painful response to uncertainty, chronic uncertainty stress, to loss of income, to the threat of the COVID-19 virus. And so the question is, how can we live with this on and on and on? And so I'm going to give you 3 tips. Expect the unexpected. We're in a new world now. Embrace the uncertainty. but that makes us anxious, right? I mean, we're so wanting things to be, the future to be certain, and we want to plan. So what can we control? That brings us to number 2, control what you can. Control your day. We can go as far as a day, and then even better, control your moments, control your physiology. Take part of the day to do some breathing exercises, to really create that restorative state that we talked about. And then lastly, stay positive, because we have no other choice, because we're living in a time of tremendous chaos, and we may easily become quite pessimistic, and especially if the election turns out badly. And we can't afford to. We cannot afford to give up hope. So we need to see the opportunities for change and growth in not just technology and society and how we live, but our social and cultural evolution, our growth as a people. And then I'll end with one question. It's not a poll, but you might say what your answer is to, if you're in the room with someone at your Zoom screen, what brings you joy? What made you happy today? So here's a summary. Remember to embrace that positive view of aging, as well as what makes you happy, what's meaningful to you. This is a web page my colleagues and I made up. It's basically on how to cope with uncertainty, the psychological and mental health aspects of the pandemic. And I've just added a section on wildfires and coping with uncertainty. So I will end there and just say I'm so pleased to be on a panel with my amazing colleagues. And I'll end there. Thank you so much for your attention. Okay, so now I turn that over to Peter.
So I and our other panelists should all now join the video and unmute. I guess I'll go first since I seem to be the first one to have joined. Thank you, Elissa. That was marvelous and very generous of you to talk about your connections, the connections of your work with the work that's going on here. I think the point that you've made that the issues about stress and its effects on the body and aging begins in pregnancy, maybe even before pregnancy, and its effects on the mother, and continues all through the lifespan of that fetus to child to young adult to adult. It really resonates with the work that's gone on here. I wonder if you could address one of the questions that came up from the audience about people who are living with painful conditions or conditions that are very physically limiting, and your thoughts about their best options in terms of stress relieving or hormetic stress, temporary stress elevations in the service of stress reduction. What your thoughts are about that?
Yes, it's a great question. I will say two things. One is that pain is inevitable and suffering is an option. So chronic pain is just such a common condition, and it takes so much effort to work with and live with. But it's that extra layer of suffering, of psychological reactivity to the pain and depression and feeling victimized and angry. That is what we can control. That's what we can manage. We may not be able to turn off the actual physical pain. So what has been quite helpful for additional coping with chronic pain, besides physical therapy, besides meds, is mindfulness. It's really mind training to be able to ride the wave of pain and to not have that second layer of suffering. We call it this, yeah. So the Wim Hof method is rife with anecdotes of helping with chronic pain and cancer and neurological disorders. So this method is super interesting, this hormetic stress. We don't know from research exactly what it's doing, exactly how it can help. But I believe it's very safe to try. For most people, it's very safe to try. And there's a free, I can put it in the link, but there's a free little mini course that Wim Hof offers. And so, you know, I personally do the cold showers, even though I hate it. And I have done the hypoxic breathing that does, you know, induce an acute stress response. And then boy, do you feel relaxed. Talk about a restorative mindset.
Thank you.
So I kind of went over with my talk, but I'm happy to answer some questions from the chat line, or do we want to move into the panel?
I think we could, you could begin with things from the chat line and we'll just chime in.
Okay. And I am happy to provide citations for some of these papers. The Wim Hof method is similar but different than the holotropic breath work. I didn't show a simple slide because I was afraid. Richard Sloan is one of the most rigorous skeptical scientists I've ever met. So I'm always a little bit hesitant to make general statements in front of him. But if I did, it would be this. I'm going to talking about this question about breathing and deep restoration. What I believe is that slower, deeper breathing is the most fundamental thing that lies at the basis of almost all mind-body activities. It's a common element that changes our mind. So the mind, you know, stress changes the breathing, more shallow, changes our sympathetic nervous system to be vigilant and alert. And then change your breathing and you're changing the mind. So mind changes the body changes the mind. I'm very, very tied to not just relying on therapy and top-down approaches, but really stressing out the body in good ways and slowing it down and using the slow breathing, belly breathing, mindful breathing. There's so many different breathing techniques. And I just feel like that's a great entry point. So by slowing the breathing, spending 5 minutes doing slower breathing, whether you're doing mindful breathing or not, if you're really changing your breathing, your respiration, you're probably increasing your heart rate variability and you're reducing your anxiety.
Maybe, Richard, could you comment about the autonomic effects of breathing and why we study heart rate variability? I saw there was a question in the chat line before about what is vagal tone anyway, or something along those lines. So maybe you could speak to that, Richard?
Sure, but I think I want to, as an alternative perspective on this whole issue, I think it's essential to that we consider the advice of Joseph Heller's Catch-22 main character, Yossarian, who vowed to live forever or die in the attempt, something we should all aspire to. So the vagus nerve is a nerve that innervates many of the organs and tissues in the body, and it has a number of health promoting effects if it is activated. And one of the ways it can be activated is just as Elissa has described, by slower breathing. It's abundantly clear that if you reduce your respiratory rate from the typical 15 breaths a minute to 6 or 8 breaths a minute, you increase the level of vagal activity, and that has a number of beneficial effects. It has effects on the cardiovascular system. It has beneficial effects on the inflammatory system. It has effects on a variety of other health promoting systems within the body. And the way in which it's typically measured is by variations in heart rate. We generally think that if you're healthy, your heart rate is very steady, but in fact, it's quite the opposite. If you're healthy, your heart rate varies considerably. And as Catherine Monk is awaiting, she knows what's coming. Our cardiology colleague, Peterson, my cardiology colleague, Tom Bigger, who taught us everything we know about heart rate variability, used to say that the heart is happiest when it dances, which is to say it's good to have a lot of variation in heart rate. It's very bad to have a heart rate that is very regular and steady. because it's an indication of poor health in a variety of ways. So.
Yep. If I can add in a similar line of thought, that Elissa, thank you so much for your talk. That was really beautiful, and you mentioned something interesting about the breath, and it's something that we hear a lot. How it's part of relaxation methods. It's also part of every ancient tradition. Around the world, the breath is a big component of this. And most people have tried yoga. Breathing is a huge part of yoga, perhaps more important than the movement itself. And it's also, it's the first thing that the newborn baby does when it comes out of the womb, right? Like the very first thing someone does when, you become an independent being is to take a breath in. And it's also the last thing you do before dying. So there's, what is it about the breath that makes it so important?
Well, we can each probably give an answer to that. And mine will be, it sends safety signals. So that when I'm going to ask us all to do this together. I want you to breathe in. Well, first of all, put your hands on your belly. Breathe in fully and really fill your belly. And now breathe out fully and slowly all the way until it's empty. Keep doing that. We don't usually exhale fully. It's the opposite of the stress state of shallow breaths. And so when you're doing that, you're sending signals that you're safe. And you're basically, from a bottom up way, telling your mind that you can turn off anxiety, vigilance, expectation of uncertainty, because you're forcing relaxation from a evolutionary fundamental way. You can do psychologically, you can try to talk yourself into feeling safe. and that works too. I think that, part of mindfulness training is you go to a place, you feel safe, you turn off your phone, you have kind of, trust in a group, and then you practice these, types of breathing and mindsets. But if you don't feel safe, it doesn't work. And so I think the mindset of safety signals, so breathing, deep, slow breathing, sends a safety signal to us. And Julian Thayer, one of our colleagues, has written a lot about how our default mode is unsafe, and we need to consciously create safety signals like breathing or other, things in our environment, turning off our phone, creating an environment that makes us feel safe, because our default is to be vigilant.
If I can,
sorry, Catherine.
Oh, thank you, Elissa. If I can jump in, and really, what an amazing talk. It's such a pleasure to listen to you. And your comments, and then and it was in one of your slides, and then I think one of the audience members, and I'm sorry I'm not remembering who now, picked up on it a bit. You used the word granularity as another, I think, one of those top-down approaches, and the comment in the chat was introspection. And I'm imagining that Peter, as a practicing psychiatrist, might also have some thoughts on that, about how that can also, those approaches can help with de-stressing.
Well, I'll go after you go, Catherine. You tell us your thoughts, and then I'll share my immediate reaction to that.
Well, I'm wondering, the word introspection connotes to me some quiet time and being with one's own thoughts. And what Elissa you had on the slide, I think you didn't have quite a moment to mention, but was the use of the word granularity. So for me in psychotherapy, what you showed on your slide, and it's certainly the way I practice at times, and I think it's very relevant to the pandemic, which is breaking down that word stress. So what is going on that's triggering that, and what are the different feelings? Is it fear of losing somebody, and also getting through your grandkids' homework if you're helping out that way? What is it? And we might use the word unpacking. So that's I think some of the top-down approaches you were mentioning, if I'm on the same page with you, Elissa.
Yeah, I'll agree with you, Catherine, and the notion that we often use words in sort of slippery and vague ways, and if we can accomplish more specific meaning and then really look at, for one thing, is that thought true? So one of the main tenets in a very evidence-based form of psychotherapy, cognitive behavior therapy, is to really look at negative thoughts and ask the question, is that really a justified thought? Is there evidence to support it? Does it actually make sense? Or is it exaggerated or ignoring the contrary and so on? So I agree with you that really trying to look at fine details of how we are thinking about things can really make a difference in how we end up feeling and how stressed we feel. So we have about 5 more minutes left for the panel discussion and Q&A from the audience. So we can certainly look at more comments from the audience. And maybe Marissa, you have been remarkably quiet over there. Maybe you'd like to say something at this point about your work and how it connects with what Elissa's been talking about.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Actually, I did want to kind of piggyback one of the comments or questions that someone did have related to, you know, could telomere length be used as like a screening tool with kids? And one thought I had just thinking about kind of intergenerational transmission is, you know, is there also an association between mom's telomere length and, you know, particular cells and their infants and, you know, and their ability to kind of regenerate, would that be similar?
That's a great question. So I think there's a lot going on with the transmission that there are many pathways. As you guys have laid out, there is there's the genetic transmission, and we know that that works with telomeres. So mom and dad have short telomeres, so does child. But there's also an epigenetic transmission, a direct transmission. So if one of the parents has very short telomeres, let's say it might be from life experience, might be from their own adversity, that is directly passed on. So through the germline, they have given sperm or egg with short telomeres, and that's what the baby ends up with. So there's a direct pathway. We call it epigenetic-like. Then there is the prenatal programming pathway also that you both study that is such a, adds to this kind of complication of thinking about intergenerational transmission. But what we know from studies that trauma that the mom experienced or just stressful life events predicts shorter telomeres in the offspring. And we think that is a prenatal exposure effect, although some of it could be transmission through. It's a very big thing right now to think about measuring trauma in kids. So I love the question about, is this a useful screener? I would say the screener that we want to think of is directly assessing for trauma in whatever ways we can. And that's a really big topic. We have Nadine Burke now as she's the general physician of California. I can't remember her exact title, but she has promoted screening of children for traumatic experiences. And I think then the next question everyone's worried about is, what do you do? You know, it's wonderful to acknowledge how important early trauma is, but then what do you, how do you treat it? You know, you can't change their dangerous neighborhood, et cetera.
Can I, there's a bunch of comments in the chat about chronic pain and so on. And as the physician on the panel, somebody who actually prescribes medications, can I ask whether you think that anti-inflammatory medications have an effect on indices of aging, such as telomere length or mitochondrial health? Maybe you could comment, maybe Martin could comment.
I don't have a comment except for to say that there's lifestyle factors that are anti-inflammatory that are associated with shorter telomeres, and no drug studies that I know of that.
No drug studies.
Transmitted and safe, et cetera.
Elissa, can I ask a question about music, the role of music and the mind? Music during pregnancy, music later on, or art, some of the other
Yeah, I would love to hear everyone else's opinion on this. Mine is that we shouldn't wait for studies on self-expression and ritual and expressive arts because we know they work and that, you know, so they have been used by wisdom traditions for so long. We don't necessarily know exactly how they work, but I feel that we tend to ignore them. And of course, there are some scholarly studies on these, but in general, we need to integrate wisdom traditions with science, that we can't just learn and have a narrow filter of something has to be proven in clinical trials. We need to wait for 5 years till we're going to write a prescription for, music or something like that. So I feel I've become more humble as a scientist and much more like valuing and wanting to learn about more of the expressive arts and traditions as a way for promoting healthy aging. There is one comment that I'm leaving this conversation thinking old age sucks. So too bad we don't have more time to discuss that, but I'll just say that the myths about aging, most of them are myths that most of the research shows that they're happier, not more depressed. The wisdom and the social networks become more positive with age. So we didn't get to go into that, but it's quite a rosy story.
So at this point, we're going to switch gears, and I'm going to try to share my screen with you now. And my job in these last few minutes is to, again, bring you back to the Wharton Fund and listening with us, but also to encourage you to partner with us. So this is the website of the Wharton Fund, and you'll have a chance to see this again. And if you go to the website, you'll see this somewhat vertiginous homepage, but I want to call your attention to the donate button in the upper right-hand corner and encourage you to think about, and please do, to help to support our work. Why you should support our work? Well, we're very busy, and we think we're busy working on valuable and important topics. Here's some of the topics that our faculty and fellows have been working on just in the last year or so. And you can see it's quite a list. I don't intend to read it through, but you can get a quick scan of that. And we're pretty successful. We get our science out there. And this year alone, just since last July, we've published about 40 or 50 papers and lots of reviews and textbook chapters besides. And these are some of the premier journals in their field. So we're getting pretty good results and able to do good science. And this is all really dependent on the support that we receive from contributions to the fund. In addition to our publishing, we're also making presentations. This is actually a year or two out of date map, but it gives you a bit of the flavor of the many meetings, international and national meetings, where members of our faculty have made presentations in the last year or so. And you can see there are many presenters. And finally, if you support the Wharton Fund, you get a great return on your investment. So this orange line here shows you that through 2019, the cumulative contributions to the Wharton Fund have totaled up to about $12 million. And when we use those Wharton Fund donations to lay the groundwork in the form of pilot studies, obtaining equipment, organizing conferences, sending our investigators to conferences where they can network and form collaborations and learn new science from others. We use that infrastructure and those pilot studies so that we can write applications for research grants from federal funding and other agencies. And what you can see here in the blue bars is that through 2019, that $12 million in Wharton Fund donation has multiplied to about $75 million in external grant funding for our projects, which is what allows us to do all the science that we're doing. So it doesn't really matter whether the donation is a small donation or a big donation. Every donation has a place where it helps us. Small donations might buy us a computer, or they might buy us a book. Big donations might get a whole program off the ground, or fund an entire pilot study that will allow us to have the initial data that we need in order to compete successfully for a grant. So we are very grateful for donations of all sizes, and we count on them in order to continue to do the work that we do. So we would say to you, thank you for being with us tonight, and please continue to support us. And as I said before, here's our website, and I'm going to leave this slide up on the screen and turn over now to Philip Wharton again. But before I do, I'd just like to say thank you again to Elissa and to my fellow panelists and to all of you in the audience for listening and for your contributions in the chat. And I hope that you've enjoyed the presentation this evening. And now I'll turn over to Philip.
Thanks, Peter. I just wanted to thank again everyone for attending, and thank the panelists for their comments. I wanted to let everyone know that a recording of the webinar is available. It will be available on our website. And if you have any feedback on tonight's webinar, you can put that in the chat. We'd appreciate that. And let's hope that next year we'll all be having dinner together instead of staring into our computer screens. And my final wish is that your telomeres remain very long, for as long as it's enjoyable. Thanks, everyone.
I neglected to add that donations will be rewarded with a copy of Dr. Epel's book. So we hope that you will support our work. And again, thank you very much.